doing my monthly manga reading log for November. I read 58 volumes from 11 different series, as well as a long manhwa series. And I'm going to just go through and talk about each series. I can't guarantee good pacing for my thoughts, but I will have timestamps. So if I'm getting a bit long-winded, or if I'm talking about a series that you're not interested in, feel free to skip to another section. And at the end, after discussing my November reads, I'll share some of the titles I plan to read in December. And before I get started, just a reminder that I will have links below to my anime list, where I track all the manga I read and the anime I watch, as well as my ratings for each one. So you can find my profile over there, and also a link to my Instagram account. I pretty regularly share my current reads in my Instagram stories, as well as my thoughts as I read them. So here are my reads for November. Okay, so I'll start with Daytime Shooting Star. I read volumes 1 to 13. This is a shoujo high school romance, and this is a story about a girl, Suzume, who moves from a small town in the countryside to the city to live with her uncle when her parents are going overseas for work. In her new school, she starts developing feelings for her teacher, and the story is basically a big love triangle between her, a 16-year-old girl, her 24-year-old teacher, Shushio Sensei, who's also friends with her uncle, and her classmate, Mamura, who is the first friend she makes after moving to the city. So this does have an age gap romance, so keep that in mind if that's not something you'd like to read. So this is my second read of this series. I read it for the first time a couple years ago, but recently I've been in a Mika Yamamori mood because she has two other recently released series, Tsubakicho Lonely Planet and In the Clear Moonlit Dusk, that have both just had their first volumes released. But in this series, I really like Suzume. She's so fun and wild, and she has a really carefree spirit. She's really honest and genuine, so you're just drawn to her right away. And through the story, as she experiences different things for the first time, we see her go through so many emotions. And in addition to Shushio Sensei and Mamura, who I actually really like a lot, both of them, almost all of the side characters are really likable and get background and character development, so it's not just friend B and friend C that you don't know anything about at the end of the story. And I really love the art style. You can really see everyone's personalities in the way they look, and their emotions are conveyed really well in their facial expressions and body language. Honestly, I don't remember if I cried the first time I read this, but this time around I was crying while reading the final volume. So the main story is volumes 1 to 12, and that's what was translated and released in English, but there is a volume 13 in Japanese, and I know some other language publishers did translate and print a volume 13. I think French, German, and Spanish all have the volume 13, but it contains several extra chapters following the characters after the events of the main story. And I feel like the content in this final volume is vital if you're reading the series to be able to get the full ending. But I really enjoyed this read, and I'm glad I was able to buddy read the whole thing with a handful of friends on Instagram. And I really, really enjoyed chatting with everyone about what we thought and sharing the panels we liked as we read each volume. I have a couple other series in this log that were also buddy reads, and I'm looking forward to doing more of them. Another series I read this month was The Savior's Book Cafe Story in Another World. I read Volume 4. I'm not sure of the demographic, but this is a fantasy isekai romance with some adventure. It follows a woman in her early 30s, Tsukina, who agrees to be transported as a savior to another world under the condition that she has a high-level magic and can generate the items that she wants. So she makes a cozy little life for herself, and as the title says, a book cafe with her apartment above the cafe. I really love how relatable Tsukina is. She just wants a chill life and likes to read, and that sounds like a lot of us in the manga community. And then her love interest, Eel, is not only a handsome knight, but also loves reading. I usually am not really drawn to fantasy series, especially if they have a lot of magic. But seeing Eel on all the covers, he was so good looking, I had to check it out. And then from the first chapter, I was like, Tsukina is exactly like me. And I've really been enjoying reading it. I liked the first 3 volumes. It's such a relaxing and cozy read. There's some romance, a little action, as there are knights that have to defend their town, kingdom from bad creatures. But the way that Volume 3 ended, I thought Volume 4 was going to have a lot of action in it. But as someone who doesn't need a lot of action, I liked that it still just had the usual amount of romance as the other volumes, and then resolved all of the conflicts that were brought up pretty well. I know this series is ending with the next volume, Volume 5, and there are still a couple loose ends that will likely neatly be tied up in the final volume, along with a happy ending. I also read Volumes 1 and 2 of Bless. This is a shonen slice of life series that follows a high school boy who works as a model, who at the start of the series has given up on his dream to become a makeup artist. So his class chooses him to model for an upcoming school event, but he decides to switch with a classmate. And instead, he does the makeup for this girl who seems to be very plain. So the story is about him reigniting his dream and trying again to pursue it. It really is like a coming-of-age story. The first volume kind of sets up what they'll be doing after high school because they're already in their final year preparing to graduate. But I really like the message from the series about pursuing what you want, working hard to achieve things, and not letting other people's opinions stop you from doing what you want to do. And also the art style is gorgeous. But big thanks to Summer from Nana's Dreams for recommending this one. I'm really glad I checked this series out, and I'll be waiting for future volumes. I also read volumes 1 and 2 of Josee the Tiger and the Fish. In English, these 2 volumes were released in a 2-in-1 omnibus volume. It's a drama romance, and I'm not sure of the demographic because this isn't one that was serialized in a magazine. It was adapted from a light novel. But I feel like it would fit right in with Josee titles. But it follows a college student, Tsuneo, who loves diving and is working hard to save up to study abroad, to study marine biology and continue diving in a different climate and environment. So in the beginning, he saves a girl in a wheelchair who is about to get in an accident, and they end up spending more time together. Our main girl, Josee, has been very sheltered her whole life, and so everything she's doing is so new to her, and their personalities really clash because she comes across as very rude and pretty selfish. But this series came highly recommended from many, so I went into this series with really high expectations. And I will say in advance that while I was not crazy about the manga, I did enjoy the animated movie. So I'll share my experience with the manga first and then talk about the movie. So hearing that this was a series that brought a lot of people to tears, I was really hoping that I would fall in love with the characters and that the story would just be absolutely devastating so that I could get a solid cry in, but still hopefully with a satisfying ending. But for me personally, the story was not very moving. I didn't dislike the story, but I was just really disappointed because I was expecting it to be a lot better than it was. There were two main reasons why I didn't care for how the story was adapted to manga. So first was the pacing. There's a section in the beginning that feels super rushed. They really cram a lot into a chapter, maybe less than a full chapter. And because of that, I just personally didn't really buy into the bond between our two main characters. And then this happens again in the second volume where there's a big portion of time crammed into one chapter again that a lot of time is supposed to have passed, and we just fly through it when it had important things happening in it. And then toward the end, there's something that happens that is just dragged on for an entire chapter when it could have been handled in just a couple pages. And saying that, it seems like, oh, it's just a chapter, but the whole manga is only 10 chapters, so the pacing definitely could have been better. The second reason this series didn't really move me was I didn't like most of the characters. I loved Tsuneo, but honestly, Josee really irritated me from beginning to end. She was just such a brat and really selfish the whole time with a really entitled attitude. And then when she's at a point to be able to start to change, she doesn't. And then the timing and her motivation for the character development she does get really bothered me. There was one side character I also liked, but his character depth was kind of wasted as comic relief, so that was too bad. But when I watched the movie, I actually really did enjoy it, and I was relieved because I buddy watched it with my friend Cadence, who absolutely loves the movie. In addition to having beautiful animation, the soundtrack was really pretty, and the voice cast was really good too. The pacing issues I had with the manga felt a lot better in the anime because you could see the time passing as they were doing things together, and surprisingly, Josee was a lot more tolerable. Her VA had a much deeper and more mature voice for her than what I had imagined, which totally changed my image of her, as I had imagined a more whiny voice for her. But also, little subtle gestures and facial expressions in the anime really softened her character, much more than how she was depicted in the manga. But I'm really curious how the manga and anime compare to the light novel. I'm really tempted to read it since it's the source material, but I'm not sure if and when I'd get around to it. So if you've read the light novel, let me know what you thought of it and how it compared to these adaptations. So ultimately, I wouldn't recommend the manga, but I would recommend the anime. I also read 2 volumes of Something's Wrong with Us. So I reread volume 10. I had already read this before, but I wanted to reread it before reading volume 11, which was a new release in November. I do typically like to reread the previous volume before a new released volume, just as a little refresher in case I forgot anything that happened. So this story is about this girl now, whose mother at the start of the series is accused of murdering this guy's father. So these two were childhood friends until the murder, and they don't re-encounter until they're in their mid-20s, and at that point, Now is trying to find out what really happened because she doesn't believe her mother did it and blames Tsubaki for the false accusation, holding a big grudge against him. And then Tsubaki is the heir to his family's wagashi shop and holds a grudge against her as well. But it's a really interesting read because Most of the story takes place within the wagashi shop facilities, and you learn a lot about Japanese sweets. And I have such a strong desire to eat the sweets drawn in this series every time I'm reading it. But the art style is really pretty. As you can see on the covers, the characters are almost always dressed in kimono, so it almost has a historical vibe, but it is set in modern day. So a lot of these volumes leave off on cliffhangers, so at the end of volume 10, I had all these guesses about where the story was going to go from there, and I was completely wrong about almost everything, but that's kind of what makes it fun reading with other people, because we all can kind of give our thoughts and our guesses about what's going to happen next. But I really enjoyed volume 11. There were a lot of developments plot-wise. There are a couple characters that I really can't stand and a couple characters that I really love. So with this volume, there are still a few loose ends that I'm really eager to see how they'll tie them up in the remaining 5 volumes. So volume 12 comes out in December, and then volume 13 in February. So I'm really hoping that all the problems and drama that we've been seeing through these volumes get resolved soon, so that hopefully the last couple volumes can have a lot of happy content rather than just being drama-filled to the very end, but we'll see. I definitely recommend this series if you like drama and want to see a rocky romance between adult characters. Another series I read was Zeikin de Katta Hon. I read volume 3. This is a seinen slice of life comedy series about a high school delinquent who starts working part-time in a library. So the first 2 volumes were very episodic, usually featuring a different customer every chapter and showing their interactions with the library staff. And not gonna lie, they were a little boring, but I wanted to read into volume 3 because the end of volume 2 finally got into more of the delinquent character and his backstory. So I was really hoping we'd see more of him in volume 3, but in volume 3 it continued to be very episodic. Some of the chapters were really boring, and some of the chapters were kind of cute. But if you enjoy slice of life stories, this could be a good one if you like a library setting, if you think that sounds fun and interesting. But I probably won't continue reading this one unless I happen to see when volume 4 is available and I have nothing else to read. Another November read was The Ice Guy and His Cool Female Colleague. I read volumes 1 to 3. This is such a cute story. It's a comedy, romance, slice of life series with some supernatural elements. So it follows a group of people who work together in an office, and the main guy, Himuro, is the descendant of people with cold abilities. So depending on his emotions, if he's happy or embarrassed or anxious, the environment changes around him. But he has a crush on one of his coworkers. So we see as the shy guy tries to get closer to her, and as the story goes, we get to know some of their coworkers as well, with a few of them having different abilities as well. But this story is really wholesome and really sweet. The beginning starts out really episodic, but as it goes, and as you meet everyone, it starts to follow more of a storyline. But this series has an anime coming out in January, so I wanted to reread it before then. I also have volumes 4 and 5 that I plan to read in December, and I'm hoping to get a hold of volume 6 too, which was released a few months ago, and the volume 7 release was actually just announced this week. But this series was licensed in English by Kamiki for a digital-only release, but I'm hoping that it'll get enough popularity to get printed in English as well. I believe right now it's only being printed in Japanese and French. And there are a few other languages with digital releases as well. But it was also just announced recently that these two main characters will be getting Nendoroids. But I hope everyone will enjoy the anime when it comes out. This is one that I'd recommend to anyone who likes a sweet romance story between adult characters. And this is one my husband has read as well, and he really enjoys this series too. I also read volumes 11 to 22 of Blue Lock and a few chapters into volume 23. So this is a shonen sports series about soccer. In this story, 300 of the best teenage strikers in Japan are brought together to compete for the top spot to be able to play on Japan's national team. So overall, I like this series. It's not the best sports series I've read or even the best soccer series I've read, but I have been really enjoying it. Up to volume 10, we were still getting to know the characters and there were a lot of different elimination rounds, but in volumes 11 and 12, there was a big twist. And then throughout these volumes, we keep meeting new characters. And even though Isugi, Rin, and Bachira are still my favorites, there are some other characters from later volumes that I think are really cool too. Both their character designs, but their actual characters too. I added Aiku to my favorites as well, and I can't wait to get a physical volume of his cover. I really liked the content in volumes 13 and 14. As the series goes on, it gets on a grander and grander scale, which kind of changes the mood and feeling of the story, but I really like where the story is heading. That being said, I do have a few complaints about the series. So firstly, from the start, I thought it was kind of dumb to have teams of all strikers playing matches against each other to find the best striker. I feel like it would be essential to have talented goalies and defenders to really train them and identify the best strikers. Next, I feel like the whole ego angle was a bit much. I had hoped that it would just be in the beginning, there to set the tone that they needed to work hard and really fight to prove themselves and for their own personal development. But a lot of the selfish playing that we saw at the beginning of the series, and even stealing the ball from their own teammate during a match, this continues through the whole series. I also didn't like that we don't see much of the players working hard to make improvements through training. Usually, mid-match, they'll just think really hard and realize something, and then instantly they're able to have that next skill level. So these kind of power up or like leveling up moments, as well as the futuristic vibe with the high-tech facilities and automated systems, after a while, it really feels like this is all a VR simulation, or they're actually in a video game or something, which they aren't. It just gives off that feeling sometimes. There is a section in these volumes where they're playing on a big field finally, and it actually looks like a soccer field without high walls and big TVs. So that section was kind of nice to get away from the high-tech futuristic feeling. One more thing that I don't really care for is the overuse of headers and trick shots to score goals. I feel like this is really common in sports series in general, that they can't just score a normal goal. It has to be something very dramatic and amazing. But again, the story is fun, but not necessarily the most accurate depiction of soccer being played in real life. But now that I've complained about some of the stuff I didn't like, I do think the progression of the story is really interesting, and there are a lot of characters that I really like. I appreciate that we see a lot of their backstories and find out what their motivations are. And in these later volumes, there are still a lot of new characters being introduced, and they do a really good job writing them in and making each of them have their own designs and little characteristics to make them memorable. I really like the art style, and I continue to be impressed as I read it with the way the mangaka draws the matches to really capture the movements of the gameplay and the intensity of the players. I have been watching the anime, and personally, I like how the story is depicted in the manga much more. Even though I usually like having the music and the voice cast adding that extra element, and I did like the animation style, I felt like a lot of the facial expressions and movements were really exaggerated and made it seem a lot cheesier and more unrealistic than it's portrayed in the manga. But if people are enjoying it, that's great, and I'm glad that the anime seems to be doing really well. And I said this last month, but I feel like even though I'm really enjoying this series, it isn't going to be for everyone. I definitely recommend it to anyone who likes sports series in general, and probably people who like action shonen series would probably enjoy the content as well. But after catching up on Blue Lock, I also read its spin-off series, Blue Lock Episode Nagi. I read Volume 1. I'm not sure how long this spin-off series is going to be, but the first volume follows Nagi and Ryuusei in high school before the events of the main story. And then we see the first elimination round for Team V from their point of view, and their first couple matches in the second elimination round against Teams Y and W. Honestly, in the first chapter, I kind of felt like this spin-off was just going to be food for all the people who are obsessed with Nagi and Ryu's friendship, not really giving much extra depth to the story, but I was wrong. Once they get into Blue Lock, you really get more into their backgrounds and personalities, and it really made me like Ryo a lot more than I did from the main story, and you can see how much they've changed from there if you've already read the main story. But Volume 1 of this spin-off is already safe to read if you've met them in the main story, so there won't be any spoilers. I feel like Volume 2 of this spin-off will probably continue with Nagi and Ryo because they haven't even met Team Z yet, but it will be really cool if this spin-off switches to like an episode Reen volume or any of the other non-Team Z main characters, and we get to follow them for portions of the story from their point of view as well. But if you like Blue Lock, this spin-off is definitely worth reading. In November, I also read a manhwa called 19 Days. I read over 400 chapters of this manhwa to catch up to the latest releases. So this is a slice of life series that follows 4 high school boys and their relationships with each other. So 2 of them are childhood friends, and they get to know the other 2 boys at school. It has a lot of comedy. There is a lot of rude body humor and kind of vulgar high school boy stuff. But then at a certain point, the story gets pretty dark. A lot of the characters have really sad backstories and difficult things that they have to deal with. There are some characters that are part of gangs. A little while ago, maybe a month or 2 ago, I saw on Instagram that a lot of people were upset about what was happening in the newly released chapters of the story because of the antagonist just being pretty terrible. So I tried to wait to start it until one of my friends could confirm that most of that difficult drama had passed. And I'm really glad I wasn't waiting week to week for new chapters to drop during the most recent sections. But I was really impressed by the character development. As you get to know each of the characters, you really fall in love with them. You either want to protect them, or you see how good of a friend they are and how they all look out for each other. The art style started out a little rough at the beginning of the story, which is logical. Then I'm sure as the creator got used to drawing these characters, the illustrations get really edgy and cool from there. From what I had seen before I started reading, from some flip throughs of this creator's art books, and of just some of the panels and official art that I had seen, I knew the art style was going to be really good and I wasn't disappointed. So now that I've caught up to the latest releases, I will be following as the chapters continue to be released. Another full series that I read in November was Haru Ride. I buddy read volumes 1 to 13 with some friends. So this is actually my third time reading this series, and I really enjoyed it this time around as well. So the main reason I read this series again instead of getting to something else on my TBR is because I really wanted to buddy read it with Dragon Ball Zoe. I knew it had been on her TBR and it was her first time reading it. So I really loved hearing her thoughts as well as the others that we were reading it with. So this is a shoujo romance set in high school that follows a girl who has some lingering attachment to a boy she liked in middle school, who suddenly moved away without any notice years earlier. She also has a lot of insecurities around making friends and trusting people. So she and the middle school boy re-encounter in high school, and no surprise, he's changed a lot. I feel like I should say there's a lot of drama in this, but none of the drama really lingers. There's a lot of really good communication and resolving things throughout the story until the next thing pops up. But there are love triangles everywhere. I believe there are 4 different big love triangles in this series, and I normally dislike series with love triangles because I usually find them super irritating, or if the girl that 2 boys both like is annoying, then I just don't have any desire to watch them battle for her love. But in this series, I like every character except for one, so I didn't mind the love triangles at all. But some of the themes in this story I really like have to do with all of the different friendships. There are a couple of friend groups that I just really love the bonds that they have, and I just kept getting all proud when one friend would stand up for another one of their friends. I just love to see stuff like that. But in the story, we see a character who has gone through some tough things and has bouts of depression, and we see some of the ways that they try to deal with their grief and how certain things affect their mental state, as well as the people around them, how they're affected. There are some parts of the story that I just get really sad every time I read, but overall, I really enjoy it by the end of things. I don't particularly care for most of the covers or the color illustrations for the series, except for these 3 covers. But I do really like the art style of the actual manga illustrations inside. This series was the first manga I ever read, which is when I discovered manga after having watched the anime, and I thought the ending was a little odd, so that's how I discovered a lot of anime is based on manga. But this series will always be a little special to me because of that. It was my husband's first manga too, because after I read it, I made him read it because he had watched the anime with me and enjoyed it. But I haven't read anything else by Iosaki Saka yet. Strobe Edge seems like it'll have a lot of what is love, but I'll probably give it a try at some point, and hopefully I will like it as well. I have had Love Me Not on my TBR for a while, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But if you've read all 3 of these, which one was your favorite? But if you do like high school romance series and you don't mind a love triangle or two, or four, this is one I definitely recommend. The next series, Tokyo Revengers. I read volume 31. This is a shonen action series with sci-fi elements of time travel. So Tokyo Revengers follows a bunch of delinquent middle school age boys and does feature a lot of violent gang activity. So with Tokyo Revengers, I had been reading the chapters weekly as they were released, and the series finally came to an end with volume 31 this past month. I won't say any spoilers, but I know a lot of people had mixed feelings about the ending, but I personally was really happy with the ending. Just like the whole story up to this point, this volume had big twists and some really moving flashbacks. I felt like there were a lot of ways that this series could have ended, but I feel like this was a really satisfying ending that tied up all the loose ends. I know there are going to be extra chapters to follow this final chapter, so I'm really hoping it will be about a volume's worth of chapters and that they'll be combined with volume 31 for the 16th English omnibus volume. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a single skinny volume for the final omnibus after the first 15 omnibus volumes that will be 2-in-1s. So I hope that's the case. But I really like this whole franchise. I'm planning to get the 4th character book in January, as well as the newest full color volume about the Toman founders, Stay Gold, and then most of the Nendroids as well. And of course, I'm also looking forward to the 2nd season of the anime coming out next year. I also read the spin-off series, Tokyo Revengers Letter from Keisuke Baji. I read volume 1. So this spin-off, so far at least, is more slice of life than action sci-fi. It has been really enjoyable to read. It follows 2 of the main characters from Tokyo Revengers before the events of the main story, including how and when they met, how their bond got to be so tight before the later events in the main story. There's also a 3rd main character in this spin-off that I'm really invested in what's going to happen with him, as I don't believe he is mentioned in the main story. But I have no idea if these spin-off volumes are going to be translated and printed in English, so I am planning on buying these volumes in Japanese. So I kind of hope it won't turn into a really lengthy spin-off. The last one on my reading log is My Dress Up Darling volumes 1-6. This was another buddy read I did as part of my book club. I had read a bit of this series already years ago and had forgotten a lot, but I had been planning to watch the anime and I wanted to reread this series before starting the anime, and I finally got around to rereading it. One of my friends on Instagram saw that it was on my November TBR and messaged me asking if I wanted to buddy read it together, so I was really happy that she asked. This is a slice of life comedy seinen series set in high school. Every volume has an explicit content warning because every volume has some ecchi content, usually cleavage and panty shots, but there is some full-on nudity, which honestly bothers me a bit because these are 15-year-old kids that are being sexualized while targeting an adult male audience. But I can look past that because I really love all the characters in this series. They're all such good and sweet kids. But this series follows this boy here, Gojo, who loves Hina dolls and wants to follow in his grandpa's footsteps, making and selling them. So at school, he's shy and unpopular, but he crosses paths with a very confident and outgoing popular girl in his class when she finds him sewing and asks him to make a cosplay outfit for her. I really love how so much of the series just focuses on cosplay. There are a lot of sections that are really educational, with some volumes focusing on types of measurements and fabrics and makeup, photography, and then there is a little bit of innocent romance throughout the story as well. I also really like how there's a really positive message about pursuing what you love and not being ashamed of doing the hobbies that you're interested in. I do have the next couple volumes pre-ordered already. So volume 7 comes out in January, and then the next 2 in March and June. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this story goes from here. So these were all my reads from November, excluding random new chapters from series I'm following the weekly and monthly releases like Yona of the Dawn, Aoashi, and some other miscellaneous webtoon series. I believe all these titles are on my anime list, so you can get more information about them on there. But if you've read any of the series that I talked about, what did you think of them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I also wanted to share what my tentative December TBR looks like. So I'm planning to reread a couple series before their anime adaptations come out in January. So I will be reading the rest of The Ice Guy and His Cool Female Colleague, as well as Tomo-chan is a Girl. I'm really excited for those 2 new anime series in January. I'm also planning to binge read Perfect World at the beginning of the month with a few of my friends, and then do a slower buddy read of Snow White with the Red Hair throughout the month. I also would like to read the manhwa, A Business Proposal, because I know this is getting a physical release in English soon, and I want to decide if it's going to be one that I want to pick up or not. I believe it's around 120 or 130 chapters though, so I'll see if I can get through it between reading these other series. But if you'd like to do a buddy read with me in the future, make sure that you're following me on Instagram so that you can see what my upcoming reads are, and you can message me on there. But that's it for my November manga reading log and my December preview. But I hope you enjoyed listening to my thoughts on everything that I read. Thanks for watching.